Welcome back, guys. Zen Cup, aka Mac Rollins here. It's Sunday, the 12th, and this is podcast number, video blog number, I don't know. I've lost count. It's probably 13 or 14. It's on the title. But today I wanted to kind of touch on some issues that are really prevalent right now for the nation, and it's kind of depressing. But excuse me. Every week, I have the ability to simply pick a topic within kind of the area that I'm focusing on for all the writing that I do and the YouTube stuff. It's kind of limitless, which is I mean, it's good for content, but it's actually bad for kind of the overall goal, which ultimately I think comes down to society changing and the change being effective enough to provide a better and safer future for our children. So today, again, I'm going to be just sort of mirroring what I posted on the blog, but the police reform that we attempted to do in 2020, it's now approaching its third birthday. But I would make the argument that there's very little to be celebrated, and we changed the game in regards to policing practices, technique, communication, application, tactics. The list goes on. And we even went as far as banning certain practices that were perfectly safe and effective. But because of one incident, we sort of coined it this universal death warrant. I'm talking about the carotid, which it's not. The carotid hold, carotid choke, carotid maneuver, whatever verbiage you want to use, has saved more lives than it has taken. And a popular buzzword right now, but it actually did a really good job at de-escalating in a scenario that could have ended with some type of fatal outcome for either party. And along with the change in some of these implementations and change in some of the tactics we use, we took funding away from local law enforcement agencies, and as a result of the funding, most of them lost their specialty units or teams that dealt with, the worst of the worst on a regular basis and in some of the most violent cities in the country. So what happens when you take the dog away from the flock, and what happens when you make society as vulnerable as possible? And the answer is you're witnessing it every day on the news. You're witnessing it on your way to work. You're witnessing it everywhere. And now more than ever, criminal violence in particular is on the rise, and random acts of violence, very horrific acts of violence, are being carried out night after night, and not just in, quote unquote, the bad neighborhoods. No, it's everywhere. I don't really think there's anywhere where we have a kind of a line in the sand in terms of what is considered to be a safe area versus an unsafe area. And safe areas and unsafe areas, those have existed in society as long as we've been able to have a society overall, right? There were just some places that you probably shouldn't go, and there were some places where you probably could go and you wouldn't have any problems. But if we look at how the violence has been expanding in terms of not only statistical data, but like the regions themselves, it would really come down to how the monster works. And I've referred to criminal enterprise before, as the monster. And the monster will rely solely on opportunity. Everything that they do is based on the opportunity to insert crime. But they will come out when they know it's safe to do so. When they realize that there's nothing to fear anymore, they're going to walk among us, and they're going to strike whenever opportunity presents itself. And lately, I would say that opportunity is quite frequent. What would normally be, uh, you know, criminal hours, if you will, nighttime generally, right? But now I think we're seeing more of these sort of, I don't call them major events, but violent events occurring 24/7. There's really no specific time. Um, but there is something to consider, and in the realm of monsters and evil and criminal enterprise, nobody is ever born a monster. And yes, there are people who are born into this world destined for evil. I totally get that, and that's a chemical imbalance in the brain, along with a variety of other contributing factors. But those people are far and few between, right? But they do exist. And for purposes of this rabbit hole I'm about to go down, I'm not talking about serial killers and stuff like that. I'm talking about people who are born into a world of criminal enterprise without a choice. And I'm talking about the kids who never stood a chance simply based on who birthed them. And there is no other innocence in the world than that of a child. They have no preconceived notions, no biases, no prejudice, no concept of hatred or evil. They just have eyes, ears, a mouth, and a brain that is starting to slowly wrinkle. And I wanted to talk about children because they are the tipping point for the future. They are the future of criminality or the future of peace, and how we get from one to the other. That's a really slippery slope. And so I've been asking myself a lot lately, how do we change the future? Well, the easy answer is we start with the youth of today. The youth of today will be the adults of tomorrow. And as of lately, I feel like the margin for criminal opportunity has been getting lower and lower in terms of age. And I encourage anyone to look at the data that's collected for the last few years and pay close attention to the birth date of the subject, not the month, but the year. And you'll notice that there's a really consistent age group, and it's absolutely alarming. We are seeing a terrifying rise in heinous crimes being committed by literal teenagers. Now, the term teenager is applicable to both minority and adult, 18 years or older, but the simple fact that most of these kids are between 16 and 20 is absolutely alarming. And the crimes themselves are also noteworthy, as many of them involve firearms. And before anyone wants to open their mouth about gun reform and legislation, from every case that I studied for this piece that I'm doing right now, all firearms, were either stolen or otherwise illegally obtained, or the person who had them was, not allowed to do so. And fun fact, a full auto Glock, which seems to be the weapon of choice these days for most kids, to get a full auto Glock with the giggle switch and everything, that takes more paperwork to buy than refinancing your home if your state allows it. Yet those are being tossed around like candy in Detroit, where they are illegal to own. Just saying. So most kids in the scenario where life has presented them with a social disposition from birth, they're not going to see it like that. They're going to see it as normal, right? If we were to look at other walks of life all over the world, whatever life you are born into, that's going to be normal until you see, or you experience otherwise. But considering how little control they have in those scenarios, they really can't be blamed for the parents they got or the house in which they live, especially when they're younger. And I stress the word parent because of the simple fact that most of these kids getting arrested, they're still teenagers. They're minors. They're not adults. So there's a major disconnect with the fact that these kids are literally running and gunning as if they're under no supervision at all. And that begs the question of parenting, or a lack thereof, and how much that influences these children and their decision making. And personally, I would argue a lot, if not all of it. And if you consider the ones who maybe understand that their lifestyle is destructive, their family's lifestyle is destructive and not a good thing, change or going against the current in that lifestyle can be extremely challenging for a kid, especially a young adult. And after being a cop in the same area for many years, I've gotten to know the criminals as well as their families. And in some scenarios, it's one bad apple, and others, it's the whole damn tree. But there are just some families that are generationally and inherently criminal by nature or design. And more times than not, in those scenarios, their children will follow in their footsteps. And seldom do we see what I refer to as cycle breakers, but that's a really common term you'll see with toxic environments involving family or relationships. But just to go over it again, a cycle breaker, that's someone who can see the toxicity of a scenario, relationship, or circumstance and then remove themselves from it successfully. But when they do so, they're in the scenario with, criminality, they're oftentimes met with resistance or guilt from their family. They will often hear things like, oh, you think you're better than us, or wow, look at you, you forget where you came from. And the people who use those words, they're cowards, and they're also inherently lazy. And they are completely content with that way of life because they know no other, or they do know the other way of life. They just know that it's really hard to get there. But they're also jealous of the cycle breaker because they know deep down that that person is doing the right thing. And when these people that use those words or say those things are parents, family, or friends, those words may sting just enough to get you to, drop that bag of good ideas and go back inside the house and just resuming life as usual, or life as usual as they know it. So why the young age and why a life of crime? Well, now more than ever, the youth of today, the youth of America, they are being told and taught by the powers that be that, cops are bad, crime is good, there are no rules, and you can take whatever you want. If you really think about it, this nation burned for 9 months, and that was completely normalized by the media, by local state government, by society. Cities and towns were destroyed, dozens were killed, and in an effort to curb violence. When I think of all of the effort and the time and the money and the pain that this nation went through, like, have we lost our minds? We opened the floodgates and we let it happen. And I say we because we are a society. We are the ones who allowed this pendulum swing. And everyone was so caught up in the activity that a lot of these people forgot about the cause. And all of these outreach groups and activists, they were so loud for so long. And my question for all of them today, right now, is, well, where are you now? You see, the issues that we are facing today as a result of the year 2020 does not fall on the backs of law enforcement entirely. If we consider the George Floyd incident, right, and the concern that it created for policing in America, there should have been an even more overwhelming concern for society in general. And the reality is we can reform and we can change policing in America as much as we want. But if society doesn't change along with it, there will be an uncontrollable wave of criminal behavior and criminal enterprise that it will be impossible to fix. And that's kind of where we are right now. And it's just going to keep getting worse. And if there was cause for concern from anyone on the side who was rallying for police reform, they generally don't give a shit when, the iron isn't hot. And I would encourage people to try and make an effort when their emotions are separate from the issue. If you look, excuse me, if you look at, oh God, hang on. Had a tickle in my throat. The ZenCop team were not technically proficient enough to hit pause because, I don't know, it's just complicated. Sorry about that. But, wow. All right, we're back. If you consider what they were trying to do versus the emotions that were tied to it, it is a recipe for disaster. Because when is it a good time to have a discussion about something. You know, I use the earthquake scenario, right? You'll hear me say that a lot. When's the best time to plan for an earthquake? Well, during the earthquake is not ideal. So let's get ahead of it. And if we talk about it before, we will be prepared when it actually does happen, if it happens. So we could say the same thing about gun control and gun legislation. I only hear people talking about it post incident or post active shooter or post whatever. And they'll talk about those kind of like headline talking points, and then it just goes away. But when people are talking or arguing, their emotions are tied to it. So they're going to almost, exclusively plug their ears and just keep talking. And they're not going to have the ability to be calm and listen. The same thing happened with George Floyd, and, everyone sort of just lost their shit for a long time. And that was a horrible time to talk about reform or talk about change, because both sides, one side's going to be dealing in absolutes, and the other side's just going to be caving to whatever they want, in theory, right? So if we rewind, and I wish I could, 3.5, 4 years ago, where you could have this open discussion, right? Well, what's going to happen if we do this? Well, if we do this, we're going to lose that. And if we do that, we're going to lose this. That's not good for society. During the entire incident, I don't think anyone wanted to hear anybody's opinion. Nobody cared. And it was very difficult to have communication on the table that didn't end in extremes or knee-jerk reactions, which is what most of that was. And I think if we were to learn anything from this event, is that history repeats itself, but I don't know why we can't simply just look back in time. And I mean, you can hand pick an incident and go, look, this is what happened. This is what we learned. And I think that the totality of these circumstances will only get worse because of technology nowadays. And then it just sort of creates this pattern, right? And it creates this mindset where both sides of the fence are going to only deal in absolutes. And that's a very toxic environment to try and find resolve in. But, the bottom line is that the numbers don't lie. As a nation, crime is on the rise. Policing and the quality of applicants are down. And there are tons of kids who would have been able to break the cycle, but now they won't. And the really sad part is that one of those bad kids and one of those bad cops, they're going to meet someday. And the result, it's going to be another atom bomb. And society will once again have to deal with the fallout. And that's a really scary thing to think about, because every day that goes by where it becomes less and less appealing to enter the career of law enforcement, all the good cops are going to go do something else. And as law and, order are kind of becoming less of a talking point and more of a, hey, we'll just figure it out, we're going to keep reducing things, then the criminal element will build and build and build. And eventually you're going to have more people committing more crimes and less cops being able to do anything about it, so that one day that's all going to come to a head, and we're going to have another bad incident, just like we did almost 3 years ago. And I like keeping both sides accountable, because that's a very realistic approach to solving this issue, right? We can all agree that George Floyd's death was horrible. It was avoidable, and it was something that should have never happened. 100%. But we have to consider that it took two people in that scenario to create it. And by no means am I saying that any of it was justified, but I would have liked for Derek Chauvin to have never been a cop, right? He had no business being in law enforcement, and he had, I don't know how he made it as a cop. I don't know what he was like when he was younger. I have no idea. But the bottom line is, at the end of the day, we can all agree that Derek Chauvin shouldn't have been in law enforcement. And we should also agree that George Floyd shouldn't have had a criminal rap sheet leading up to the encounter with Derek Chauvin. That's how we need to look at this issue, is that there are multiple issues and multiple problems we are facing as society. And if we are able to do it the right way, right? I mean, going back to the knee-jerk reactions and the sort of just wham, bam, we got to implement this now and it's going to change everything. No, that's not the way to look at it. We have to look at this from multiple perspectives, multiple areas of thought, and then find the one that works the best, that will create a safe space for everyone to live. And right now we just don't have that. And I hate to say it, I don't see it getting better anytime soon. And I don't know what the recovery process is going to be like from here on. I really don't, because there are a lot of good cops who are, leaving or otherwise saying, I'm going to do something else. And every time you take a good cop away from an agency, they lose a piece of that, structure, right? All the good cops, they're these cornerstones for these agencies. And when those good cops start to go away, well, someone's going to be there to replace them. And I don't know the caliber of that man or woman and how that's going to affect the agency. Everything has a ripple effect. And right now, me personally, I'm just sort of sitting back and going, wow, this is bad. It's not getting better. And I think if you're a cop and you're listening to this, that last sentence, everyone is on the same page. Yes, this is the worst it's ever been for us, right? For our generation. But that's it, guys. I'm going to call it quits. I appreciate you if you're listening. Thank you. I like to, keep things relevant to the times, but I also like to have discussions that are sometimes difficult to have, even if I'm having them with myself. There is no easy way to talk about certain things, and there is no proper etiquette to utilize. And I'm just trying to do the best I can with the knowledge that I have, trying to keep people motivated, and not just for cops, but for anyone. If you are a member of society, then you are a part of what could be the change. So don't underestimate your ability to be a good human. Doesn't take much. It's actually pretty easy. Anyway, guys, thanks for listening. You can find me on Instagram at the Zen Cop, Twitter. I don't really tweet, but also the Zen Cop, and here on YouTube, you're obviously here, or thezencop.com for the blog. That's it, guys. Thanks a lot for listening, and I'll see you guys next week if I have time. I got nothing more. Thanks for listening.